Everyone, welcome to another episode of Ask a Property Manager. This is episode 67, and today is April 21st, 2021. We're coming to you live from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, Principal Broker of Own Buffalo, Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about an NFL player who's looking to make his mark on real estate. We'll take a look at fair housing policy for Fair Housing Month. We'll answer some questions from housing providers around the country, and so much more. Before we jump into that, we're going to plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern. You can catch those live on our Facebook page. You can also catch the replay on our Facebook page as well as our YouTube page on the same day. So those both go up on Wednesday. And don't forget about our Instagram as well. New episode of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drops this week. That'll actually drop tomorrow on Thursday. We're taking a look at contacting former landlords for references. We're talking about renters insurance requirements and tenants requesting application fee refunds. So that's a pretty interesting episode. Don't miss out on that. New episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drop every other Thursday morning anywhere podcasts are heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. We're going to go ahead and jump right into our news here, starting with our article for Fair Housing Month here. If you're not aware, April is Fair Housing Month, so I wanted to cover something talking a little bit about some fair housing policy, just so that you know what's new and exciting in that land of fair housing. This comes to us via Housing Wire. This was published yesterday, April 20th. Fudge says HUD will focus on housing discrimination. As lawmakers take up housing-related bills in Congress, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge has laid out her priorities during an address at the Mortgage Bankers Association Spring Virtual Conference. She hailed the passage of the American Rescue Plan as a landmark law and highlighted its $10 billion in mortgage assistance and another $4.5 billion to help households pay utility bills. Fudge also emphasized the strong position of the Mutual Mortgage Insurance Fund. The fund, she said, is well positioned to continue to provide for those who have fallen behind on mortgage payments. She also drew attention to the home ownership gap between white and black households, which she said is wider today than it was in 1968, when banks could still legally discriminate against borrowers based on the color of their skin. What binds us all together is the belief in the power of home ownership, an aspiration that speaks to a basic bargain that lies at the heart of the American dream, said Fudge. If you work hard and play by the rules, you deserve a place to call your own. The former congresswoman from Cleveland said that the fair housing enforcement would be a central priority at HUD. President Joe Biden, let's try that whole sentence again. The former congresswoman from Cleveland said that fair housing enforcement would be a central priority. HUD, at President Joe Biden's behest, is exploring options to further that mission, such as having an effective disparate impact rule. In 2013, HUD issued a disparate impact rule that made clear that there would be a liability for housing discrimination regardless of intent. But Trump's administration moved to gut that rule in 2019, and then HUD Secretary Ben Carson issued updated guidelines requiring regulators to prove intentional discrimination on the lender's behalf. While Fudge tackles housing discrimination at HUD, lawmakers on the Financial Services Committee are mulling measures to revise a debt collection rule and increase diversity in the housing industry. One of the bills Congress would potentially hobble, a 2019 Supreme Court decision in which the justices ruled that a business engaged in non-judicial foreclosure proceedings is not a debt collector under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, FDCPA. The MBA, in a statement, said it supported the court's unanimous ruling and would oppose any legislation to overturn it. Lawmakers will also hash out a measure to analyze federal underwriting standards and guidance and promote diversity in the appraisal profession. The MBA noted in its support for the initiative the shortage of appraisers in rural, lower income, and predominantly minority areas. Another bill would establish an advisory group to increase the diversity of boards for publicly traded companies, which the trade association supports. And although the MBA supports another measure to create a more diverse and inclusive workforce in the financial services sector, it cautioned lawmakers against imposing additional punitive regulatory burdens. So there you have it, a little bit of an update on what's going on during Fair Housing Month. It sounds like HUD is going to be really pushing the disparate impact rulings and things of that nature as things go on here. Fair housing is one of those things that, yes, it's Fair Housing Month. Yes, we talk about fair housing quite a bit in the month of April. But fair housing is one of the practices that you need to be on board with 24/7, 365 if you're going to be in this industry. It's at the point where there's simply no room for discriminatory housing practices, and there shouldn't be. So that's where we're at in things when it comes to fair housing. It's interesting to see how different administrations prioritize the enforcement of different things. And in Biden's administration, it looks as though fair housing is going to be one of the things that is enforced pretty heavily. So that's something to certainly keep in mind. Our next news article is actually a little bit more lighthearted. This one is coming to us from CNBC. This was posted last Saturday, April 17th. NFL player LeSean McCoy wants to build a real estate empire using opportunity zones. This is a pretty interesting article. Let me clear that there. And we'll go through this article as well. NFL running back LeSean McCoy admitted that he had no clue how to handle finances earlier in his career. McCoy didn't know how to make money from his large NFL paychecks, and saving wasn't an option either. Now, being in my 12th year in the league, looking at all the investments I've made from the good to the bad, I think I've learned, McCoy told CNBC. It's National Financial Literacy Month, and McCoy said he's more motivated to further generate finances not only for himself, but also for his family. Months after getting his second Super Bowl ring, as McCoy was on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster, the 32-year-old player is using the off-season downtime to finish real estate developments. McCoy and his brother LeSean operate a real estate firm, Vice Capital. With McCoy's playing days almost over, he's using the real estate investment route to continue building wealth post-NFL. We're still starting up, but that's the main goal, said LeSean. He added that another mission is to help NFL players learn how to make money other than just playing football. Using the opportunity zones. Vice Capital invests in distressed properties in lower-income communities, renovating buildings to create new housing units and commercial space. The McCoy brothers use opportunity zones to develop some properties. The areas were created as part of the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and provide developers capital gain tax incentives. They're designed to direct investment to underdeveloped sections of cities and help increase the neighborhood values without triggering a rise in rent that would drive residents out of the rebuilt communities. LeSean's brother told him about the opportunity zones in 2017, but LeSean said he was skeptical when he learned about the legislation was passed under President Donald Trump's administration. Who's this really for? He asked his brother. Before it became official, the legislation was supported by U.S. senators, including Senator Cory Booker and Senator Tim Scott. After researching legislation and identifying the tax exemptions, LeSean determined it was a win-win. On the other side, as a humanitarian, you're able to affect certain communities that need that change, added LeSean. Those are usually inner-city areas. Former NBA player David Robinson also uses opportunity zones for development. The McCoy brothers have 60 properties, some of which operate under Vice, including buildings in the hometown of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and in Philadelphia, where he played with the Eagles for 6 seasons. We want to build that empire in real estate, LeSean said. LeSean played in the NFL for the 2005 season with the Arizona Cardinals. LeSean played 12 seasons, was selected to 6 Pro Bowls, was on the Kansas City Chiefs team that won the Super Bowl. I think that's Super Bowl 35? I got to look that up now. L-I-V in Roman numerals. It's going to bother me all day if I don't. Oops, let me switch back to desktop screen here. Super Bowl 54. I was way off. LeSean made $63 million in his career, according to Sport Track. LeSean asked his brother to help operate Vice, which he launched in 2018 while he maintained his NFL career. The hard part for players is trusting, LeSean said. My brother is a guy that I trust like no other, so that's probably why it works so well in the real estate. He's constantly teaching me. During COVID-19, LeSean trusted LeSean to handle losses accumulated for the firm as construction was halted and residents occupying units had eviction protection. LeSean didn't disclose financials to CNBC, but said Vice's losses were less than $2 million. We're brothers, but he would absolutely fire me, LeSean joked. The biggest loss that I can pinpoint isn't dollars, but opportunity. Before the pandemic, LeSean and Vice Capital were in negotiation to purchase a property near LaSalle University in Philadelphia's Germantown neighborhood. The property decreased in value, but when COVID-19 spiked real estate prices, the owner took it off the market and then relisted it at double the previous price, putting it out of Vice's range. LeSean said the pandemic put a strain on things as materials like lumber have soared, increasing construction costs, but I would also say it's made the seller's market more magnified, he added. Interest levels are cheap, and everyone wants to buy. It's here that LeSean is trusting his brother again. LeSean's in favor of selling some properties with price tags. With prices high in a red-hot real estate market, LeSean is against the idea. Sometimes we agree on things and sometimes we don't, LeSean added, but the good thing about our bond is that I can trust him with our business. The McCoy brothers can't unload the Opportunity Zone properties, though. The investors get a tax break on their capital gains if they leave their money in a selected community for at least 10 years. What's next on the field? Though LeSean counts on his brother for business advice, he still needs to decide on his career for 2021 as the season nears. LeSean says he wants to play but remains uncertain about a team's interest. There are some teams I probably won't play for that reached out, he said. Other teams, hopefully we can get an agreement on some things. It's just got to make sense. Recapping his 2020 season, LeSean said playing with the Bucs quarterback Tom Brady was a great experience. The whole journey to see and play with him. I scrimmaged against him when I was in Philly. Brady was then with New England. He was like a drill sergeant, and then actually playing with him, I could see it. He's so intense and smart, LeSean said. I've never played with a quarterback like that where he's 43. It was cool to see. If retirement is near, LeSean said he has options and real estate is the main play. Asked about stocks or other investing, such as Bitcoin, LeSean said he tried the investments, but is no longer interested. My thing is real estate, LeSean said. That's something I understand. I don't need to take someone else's word for it, and the ups and downs, it's just a lot. With real estate, I can see what's going on, I can see my money, touch it, and feel it. So that's a pretty interesting article. It's there was one point that I wanted to bring up in here, and it was kind of early on in the article where they were talking about NFL players and trying to generate revenue outside of their paychecks. Right here. I actually have a friend here. He used to live in Buffalo. Now he lives out in Los Angeles, who is a financial planner and works with a lot of professional athletes and things like that. And one of the things that he actually had mentioned to me is that many professional athletes wind up penniless, broke, penniless, bankrupt within just a few years of retirement, simply because they thought that the career was going to last forever. Everybody feels invulnerable at the beginning of their career. And some of those careers, like Tom Brady's, for instance, go for an extended period of time. And some careers go only one season, or you might get injured in your first game. You just never know how long a career like that is going to last. So the budgeting aspect and making sure that you're setting money aside for savings and things like that, that is something that is a major concern in a lot of the professional football leagues, professional sports leagues in general, not just football. This is football, NBA, baseball. Anytime that you have a large sum of money, it's very easy to spend a large sum of money. And if they're not setting that cash aside, it's very, very easy for these players to fall into that trap and wind up broken penniless within just a few years. So financial literacy matters to everybody. Doesn't matter if you're a professional football player, doesn't matter if you're a high school student. Financial literacy matters to everyone. So now that we've covered that, let's jump to something a little bit more humorful. I saw this on Facebook the other day, and I swear to God, I have to buy this hat. The cost of lumber, at least here in Western New York, really anywhere in the country, we were paying $2 to $3 for a 2x4, last year, and now it's up to $8. Plywood is insane. All the lumber prices are insane. But I saw this hat, and I laughed so hard, and I feel like I need that particular hat. I don't even wear hats. I just think it's that funny. Some people won't get this reference. Other people are going to laugh very, very hard when they see this reference. And I think it really just boils down to your age at the end of the day. If you know the movie, if you know the reference, you'll certainly understand it. Otherwise, watch American Pie, and that's the best I can tell you. Let's jump to our questions from housing providers around the country. We're going to start with this one on cosigners on a lease. I rent mostly to college students and require a cosigner. I've seen where the parents are on the lease, and I currently do a separate agreement for the cosigner. Which way is better or more secure? We put our cosigners on a separate agreement from the lease. It's just a guarantor agreement. It actually it's one of those documents that's tied to the lease, but it's separate from the lease, if that makes sense. So it's the guarantors are signing just the guarantor agreement, but not the actual physical lease itself. A couple things that I can recommend as far as tips: make sure that your guarantor agreement either automatically renews when a lease is renewed, or that you get an updated copy signed by all parties every time you renew the lease, because you don't want to find out that you no longer have that guarantor protection simply because of a paperwork issue. Screen your guarantors the same way that you would screen your normal tenants. You're definitely going to want to see more income from your guarantor. We use a 4.5 times the rent, 4.5 times the rent as our qualifier for a cosigner. And the reason we do that is because a cosigner not only has their own expenses, their own rent or mortgage, vehicle payments, utilities, food, whatever the case may be, they're also going to have to be in a position where they can pick up the cost of the rent on this unit if that, turns into an issue. So you want to make sure that they have at least enough income to cover their expenses as well as this rent if they're required to. That's the entire point of a cosigner, is having somebody that's financially secure in the event of a default by the original tenant. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Screen them the same way that you would screen your normal tenants, and then add them to a separate agreement. That's how we handle it here in our office. On to our next question on neighborly disputes. I feel like mediation between tenants is part of the job as a property manager, but I'm beginning to wonder if this is wrong. I manage a complex wherein 2 units do not get along. They are constantly complaining about each other to me. Really petty, childish stuff. Tonight, they both called me after hours. I only answer after hour calls from on-call staff, and they were complaining. I guess one was playing their music too loud, the other asked them to turn it down, they got defensive, blah, blah, blah. This is absolutely burning me out. How do people on here deal with immature tenants like this? Issue violations to everyone? I'd order them both to leave when their leases were up if I could, but state COVID restrictions won't allow it. I cannot allow the few hours I get off every day to be swallowed up by this nonsense anymore. I completely understand where you're coming from. Disputes between tenants are one of those things that are a real headache to deal with, because it's not like you're physically there 24/7, 365 to see what's going on or anything like that. What you're dealing with is pretty typical neighborly disputes, neighborly squabbles by the sounds of it. My recommendation is try not to get involved with it. These are both consenting adults that either need to deal with it like adults, or if it turns into something where it's threatening or a physical nature, at that point they need to contact the police department. Because again, that's outside of the scope of what you can handle as a property manager. At the end of their lease terms, I would explain to them that given the complaints back and forth, now is the time for them to depart if this is really that big of an issue to them. And I think what you'll find is it's amazing how most people will just, all of a sudden everything is fine, when it would result in the inconvenience of a move or something like that. You know, they either learn how to deal with it, or they learn to ignore their neighbor, or whatever the case may be. You know, you're a housing provider, you're not a therapist, you're not a babysitter, and you're certainly not the police department. These tenants can deal with their own disputes between themselves. It's not something that you need to be in the middle of by the sounds of things, at least at this stage. And that would be my recommendation, is just stay out of it as much as possible. Again, they are adults, they can handle the situation themselves. On to our next question. Maybe, there we go. Buying an occupied foreclosure. I'm considering bidding on a single-family residence that's listed on auction.com. My concern is that it is currently occupied but is not held as a rental. It's occupied by the current owner, or prior, considering the bank has taken it back. Does anyone have experience getting residents with I'm assuming that they meant to say getting rid of residents with the current COVID restrictions? Would this be handled as an eviction, even though they are not tenants? So in the state of New York, yes, this is probably going to be handled as an eviction. Your first stop here is you need to talk to a landlord-tenant attorney that understands what the restrictions are in your area governing evictions and foreclosures right now. Have somebody on your side that understands what it is that you're trying to accomplish and knows what the rules are to help you get to what you're trying to do. Here in New York, this would wind up as an eviction, more than likely. Once the bank forecloses on the property, even when the bank forecloses on the property, if the previous owner is still living there, the bank would have to go through that same process to get the person out of the property. They'd have to go through an eviction. And right now, there's not a lot of eviction cases that are being heard in the state of New York right now. So the moratoriums, keep getting extended over and over. It may be quite a while before you can evict if you decide to purchase this home. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. That's something you're going to have to factor into your expenses, your cash flow when you are considering this as a property. Does it make sense to have a property that you might not be able to get into, at least not immediately? And then what kind of damages are going to be found as a result of the outgoing tenants, if you will, when they are eventually forced out of the property? Another option, another option that you might be able to pursue once you own the property would be a cash for keys scenario. Offer them cash to just get out of the property and move on so that you can reclaim the asset and basically move forward. We've talked about cash for keys a ton of times. You can go back through some of our archive videos to find that stuff. But a cash for keys, we have seen cash for keys be effective. We've actually offered cash for keys on behalf of the bank quite a few times in the REO deals that we've done as well. So cash for keys might be your better option than trying for an eviction here. But either way, I wouldn't do anything until after you've run the numbers and made sure that you can support. You might as well run the numbers and make sure that you can support $0 cash flow for the next 12 months, because who knows how many times these eviction moratoriums will be extended. And depending on your state, you may be in a situation where you don't have any other option other than cash for keys or an eviction. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Hopefully you are able to get on that property, and best of luck to you. Our last question of the day is on screening a Section 8 tenant. This is a question for landlords who accept Section 8. How do you fairly screen Section 8 tenants? We have an apartment available and have had several people inquire as to whether we accept Section 8. We have one Section 8 tenant already, but we inherited her with the apartment building when we bought it. I've never screened a Section 8 tenant. They obviously would not meet the income requirement, but is there some way to prove how much Section 8 qualifies them for? If I could get some sort of proof, I wouldn't have a problem counting that towards their income. The rest I could screen fairly. For example, I had a lady inquire about the apartment. She's going to college, has no job, and is pregnant. She claims that she qualifies for Section 8. Can I ask her to provide a copy of what they have qualified her for? Otherwise, she definitely doesn't meet the income requirements. So I'm going to start this by answering your first question. How do you fairly screen Section 8 tenants? You screen a Section 8 tenant the exact same way that you would screen any other person that applies for an apartment. Use your predetermined written criteria and don't deviate from them. As far as verifying the actual voucher amount, they should have some kind of a document from Section 8 indicating their eligibility. You could also ask the applicant for the caseworker's name and phone number, and you could reach out to the caseworker to ask them some questions. Most caseworkers are pretty good about getting in contact with you and walking you through the process and things like that. It's all pretty standard for them. It's a pretty typical scenario. Keep in mind that at least here in Western New York, we don't actually find out what the Section 8 portion is and what the tenant portion is until we get the HAP contract back. And that's after you've already been through the application process, after you've already been through the inspection process and past that. That's when we actually get our HAP contracts here in Western New York. So we don't find out the true tenant and the true Section 8 portions until very, very deep into the process. We have a general idea at the onset, but generally we won't get the HAP contract until after everything else is wrapped up. So that could still leave you with income concerns if Section 8 is only contributing a small amount at the end of the day after you go through that whole process. My recommendation would be ask the applicant if they have anything from Section 8 indicating what they qualify for. And if they don't, I would say talk to their caseworker and find out how many bedrooms they're approved for and up to what rental amount. And that'll probably be enough to help you make your determination. So good luck. Definitely stick to your criteria the same as you would any other time. April is Fair Housing Month. That's definitely something to keep in mind. Here in the state of New York, we do have a source of income protection law, which means that if you are a housing provider here in the state of New York, you have to be willing to accept Section 8 as part of their lawful sources of income. So that's something to keep in mind too. If you're not here in the state of New York, you might want to check your state or your local municipality even, because we had this in Erie County before we had it at the state level. You might want to just check to see what the guidelines are with requirements of source of income, lawful source of income. Definitely something that you're going to want to know, definitely something to learn, especially during Fair Housing Month. That pretty much wraps things up for this week's episode of Ask a Property Manager. Thank you all so much for watching. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments, either on Facebook or YouTube, and your question may be answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if I brought some value to your day, do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode on Wednesday, April 28th at 10 a.m. Eastern. Again, we'll be back with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.